Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to focus our attention on something a little different. The messy, fascinating, and, let's be honest, frequently unglamorous reality of local governance.
Yeah, we're talking about the people who make decisions that really affect your day-to-day life.
Your local public servants.
That's right. So instead of, federal politics or these grand narratives, we are going deep, really deep into the operational truth of the job.
And we have some incredible source material for this. A listener sent us a truly unique document. The meticulous time log kept by a local supervisor in Newtown over the entire year of 2025.
It is an amazing source. It's a PDF called How I Spent My Time as Supervisor in 2025.
Right, and it's just this incredibly granular look at their commitment. It breaks down, every single hour, every activity, and it even gives a really candid look at the financial side of things.
And the mission for us, from the listener, was pretty clear. They wanted a shortcut, really, to understanding how local governance actually consumes time.
Especially when the person in office commits to this kind of radical transparency and accountability. So before we get into the breakdown, let's just drop the one foundational fact that anchors this whole deep dive. Over the entire year, 2025, this supervisor logged a total of 388 hours.
388 hours for all official activities.
Which, when you do the math, averages out to just 32 hours a month.
It's a high responsibility, but technically a part-time commitment. And the context here is just so important. The supervisor states they did this rigorous tracking, not just for accountability to residents,
Right.
but also to audit their own performance, to make sure they were using their time in the best way possible.
And this commitment to accountability is even more notable because their term is ending. They've served for 8 years, and their time on the Board of Supervisors officially ends in January 2026.
Which really underscores the motivation, I think. They're stepping away from the elected position, but they're framing this document as a kind of final act of dedication to open government.
It's like a gift to the community.
Exactly, emphasizing continued support for transparency, for resident involvement, long after they're gone.
Okay, let's unpack this time log, and I think we have to start with the most surprising part, which is the money, the actual compensation.
Yeah.
Because this is where the commitment and maybe the sacrifice really gets quantified in dollars.
We are looking at the, surprising economics of public service at this level. The supervisor's yearly stipend, and remember, a stipend is a fixed annual payment for the job.
Right, not a salary.
Not a salary. It's $4,125.
And the source material highlights that this amount has been static for a long, long time.
For many years, yeah.
So, okay, when you take that $4,125 and you divide it by the 388 total official hours logged, you get a pretty meager hourly wage.
They do. It works out to $10.63 an hour.
That's 63.
Now, to be fair, the supervisor does note that this is still higher than the Pennsylvania minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour. But, and this is a big but, that 1063 figure is the result of what they call maximizing effort. It assumes they did every single bit of prep, every communication task they logged.
And this is where we get to that financial aha moment. Because we have to look at the job requirement versus the job commitment.
Exactly. The source material shows that attending the required meetings, so that's your board of supervisors, regular meetings, special sessions, executive sessions, that accounts for a shockingly low percentage of their time.
It's only 11%.
Just 11% of their total logged time.
So if this supervisor had chosen to be the low-effort supervisor, the one who only showed up for that mandatory 11% of the job,
their effective hourly wage would just explode.
it jumps dramatically.
It skyrockets to about $102 an hour.
$102.
Yeah. Think about that. The choice to do the bare minimum elevates the pay substantially. Even if they just include meeting prep time, the wage is still around $37 an hour.
So the supervisor consciously sacrificed, an $80+ hourly premium just to do the necessary informed work.
Wow, right. That disparity is incredible. It completely flips your understanding of public office on its head. It tells you right away there is zero financial incentive for this level of dedication.
It also leads to a necessary structural question for the listener. Who can afford to hold this kind of position?
That's the real question. When the effective wage for a truly informed, high-effort supervisor is $10.63, that role becomes, essentially inaccessible to working-class candidates who need a reliable income.
Or can't absorb the cost of childcare for all those extra hours of prep.
Exactly. This reliance on personal sacrifice, it creates an unintentional financial barrier to entry.
And it puts the whole role into perspective when we look at the political landscape. The source material mentions the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, or PSATS.
Right.
They've been lobbying the state for a stipend increase for years.
And getting nowhere. And this data point helps explain that political inertia. PSATS is making the case that the job demands more compensation, but critics can look at this and say,
well, they're already making more than minimum wage for a low-commitment job.
Exactly. That framing makes it a really difficult argument to win politically, even though we now see the true cost of an informed public servant is so much higher.
The takeaway is crystal clear. This supervisor is absolutely in this for the grind, not the cash.
Which brings us nicely to our next segment, the time flow. Let's look at where these 388 hours actually land throughout the year, because the work is far from steady.
Right. The monthly hours chart, it shows the workload really swells and contracts based on the municipal calendar. The average is 32 hours a month, but the low point was May, only 11 hours.
And there's a specific reason for that dip, according to the source. The supervisor was on vacation in Europe and missed one Board of Supervisors meeting.
So life happens, even for public servants.
Of course. But then you see the high points. January was high, 45 hours, which probably reflects all that start-of-year reorganization work.
And then November was the highest month of the entire year, almost hitting 48 hours.
That November surge is fascinating. It often reflects budget finalizations, maybe some election aftermath. A lot happens at the end of the year.
So if we pivot now and look a little closer at the hours by day of week chart, we start to see the weekly rhythm of that commitment.
Yeah, the supervisor explicitly stated, I worked for you every day of the week. But that work is not evenly distributed at all.
Definitely not a 9 to 5. The work clearly peaks in the middle of the week. Wednesday has the highest total activity, nearly 120 hours over the year.
And Monday is right behind it, the second highest day, approaching 100 hours.
This pattern is key, isn't it? It connects directly to that preparation component we were talking about.
It does. Board meetings usually happen midweek, so those high totals on Monday and Wednesday, they reflect that intense need for prep beforehand and then all the follow-up work right after the meeting.
And, maybe unsurprisingly, the lowest activity day is Sunday. Only about 12 hours total for the entire year.
So while the commitment is daily, the bulk of the intense effort is really concentrated at the start of the week, driving toward those meetings.
That daily rhythm, it really sets up the analytical core of this whole deep dive, which is what we're calling the 43% puzzle.
The breakdown of activities and the imbalance between the core function and the supporting work is, well, it's staggering.
Let's run through that pie chart again.
Yeah.
We already said attending required meetings. That's the core legal duty. It's just an 11% slice.
11%. But contrast that with the largest category by far, preparation for BOS meetings. That consumes a massive 43% of the supervisor's time.
43%.
The rest of the time is attending optional meetings at 18%, interaction with residents at 24%, and then travel is a minimal 4%.
But let's stay on that 43%. A skeptical resident might ask, is this supervisor just being inefficient? I mean, could the job be done with 20% prep time?
That's the essential question, and the supervisor actually addresses it in the source material. They recognize that a supervisor could just sit in the meeting, passively vote, sign checks, without really understanding the issues.
Or the history, or the financial implications.
Right. So that 43% isn't padding the clock. It's the necessary hidden cost of informed governance. The supervisor argues that adequate research is the only way to fulfill their oath and serve the health and welfare of all citizens.
Not just the loudest voices in the room.
Precisely. And what's fascinating here is the specific methodology that accounts for some of that 43%. They take an extra step, mentioning they create a chronicle, a detailed written account of each meeting in order.
And they incorporate that into their notes before the next meeting.
Yeah. That detail, it really sticks with you. It shows a commitment to institutional memory. They aren't just reading the current agenda packet.
No, they're connecting the current issue to the history of past decisions. From your perspective as a resident, that 43% is the difference between a reactive supervisor who just rubber stamps things.
And an informed supervisor who understands the long-term impact of their vote. That 43% prep time is the essential, unglamorous work that makes the 11% of meeting time actually effective.
Which brings us nicely to the second largest official category, interaction with residents. 24% of their time.
And the supervisor views this outreach as equally important as the meetings themselves.
They detail a multi-channel approach: personal contact, official township email, a personal email account.
Right. John at johnmacknewtown.info, they list it right there. Also phone calls and Facebook. It's an effort to meet residents wherever they are.
And what really stands out is the legacy of the pandemic on local government. They continued hosting remote Meet Mac Monday Zoom meetings.
Sometimes Tuesday.
Right, sometimes Tuesday,
Wow.
which they started back in 2021. And this provides continuous scheduled access for residents.
And they get a decent crowd, usually 6 to 15 attendees for each session. That consistency builds trust.
But now we have to turn to the activities that highlight the truly, well, sacrificial nature of transparency in the modern era.
Yes. We have to talk about what's excluded from that official 388-hour log. These are the supervisor's transparency efforts, which are entirely uncompensated.
Let's just list what wasn't counted in that official total: posting to their blog, maintaining a personal website, writing a newsletter, creating and posting video clips from meetings.
Hosting podcast interviews, summarizing Board of Supervisors decisions.
And they meticulously define these things as not part of their official duties, but as personal views and efforts.
This is what I'd call the modern cost of transparency. I mean, why must a supervisor maintain a personal blog? Because the official township website often moves too slowly.
Or the official communications are too constrained by policy to provide the kind of detailed analysis residents really want.
Exactly. It underscores that the high level of transparency the supervisor maintained requires a significant, uncompensated personal effort entirely outside the scope of that $10 an hour job.
So the official log, in a way, is actually an undercount of the total time they spent serving the community.
It is, and that commitment to voluntary accountability goes even further. The supervisor also mentions keeping an unofficial 2025 voting record.
And they clarify, minor motions like approving minutes are excluded, and the official record is always in the BOS meeting minutes.
But the goal is to make their decision-making process immediately accessible to you, the resident.
So what does this all mean when we pull back and look at the whole picture? Let's recap the main takeaways here.
Okay.
This deep dive showed that the nominal duties of a supervisor that required 11% of meeting attendance are completely dwarfed by the necessary self-imposed work of preparation.
At 43%.
And resident engagement at 24%.
Right, and the job is clearly driven by an immense personal commitment, not by compensation. The result is that effective rate of just $10.63 per hour.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this level of dedication averaging 32 official hours a month, it suggests that informed local governance relies heavily on finding people willing to make significant personal and financial sacrifices.
We are, in effect, relying on a pool of highly dedicated but very low-paid individuals. And that reliance on personal dedication rather than, structural compensation has huge implications for who can even run for office.
Exactly. The source material meticulously separated their official duties from all those transparency efforts, the blogging, the social media.
All the stuff that modern residents expect.
So here is a final provocative thought for you to carry forward. For a public servant to be truly informed, like the one we studied today, and truly accountable in this digital age, how much of their necessary effort, like maintaining websites and summarizing complex decisions, must remain unofficial and unpaid?
And if that level of personal effort is what's required to govern well, what does that mean for the future of local public service? For candidates who just don't have the financial flexibility to work for, essentially, $10 an hour?
A critical question for our democracies. Thank you for diving deep with us into the reality of local office.
We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.